Hi everybody, welcome to Lesson 10 of Ignite Your Music Career. It's funny, that little track that you heard is only 55 seconds long. It's called Thrilling Escape, as you can see, and it's on a bunch of TV shows. It still pays royalties, written in 2011, still pays royalties today. So that's why you got to get your music out there, and it'll just find its reach when you're in a lot of these non-exclusive music libraries. So today, what I want to talk about is a situation where your music is accepted. You sign your non-exclusive agreement or contract with a music library or libraries. We're going to talk about the process now of what's called titling and retitling. We're going to talk a little bit about payments from your PRO and from music libraries. I'm going to show you a trick that I use to avoid confusion for payment and that sort of thing. And as usual, there's an activity, and enjoy the free samples as well. So let's get started. Retitling and payments. Okay, so your music has been accepted into a library or hopefully many libraries. The contract is signed, the non-exclusive contract. First thing you want to make sure before you submit any music to non-exclusive libraries is to make sure your song, your original title, is actually registered with your PRO. So if it's BMI, ASCAP, either one, whichever one you're involved with. So what happens now, you upload your songs or your tracks in the way they want. It could be via WeTransfer or maybe right through their site or any other kind of transfer link. You might want to ask the question now, if I submit my tracks to so many different libraries, how do these TV shows know which library submits what track or the same track to the shows? It's very simple. So you have your original title of your song. So if your song is Another Rainy Day, if it's called like that, if it's something like that, the library is going to then take that song title and they're going to add that title to their catalog, but they're going to change the name. And there's a few ways they do this. Sometimes with a prefix or something at the beginning, sometimes at the end, sometimes they add a number to it, and sometimes they change the name completely. Then they register that song with that title. So for example, there's a library called Jingle Punks. A lot of you guys probably know who they are. They might take that song Another Rainy Day, and it's already registered with your PRO, with you as 100% owner of it, and that's important, that's why you're registered. If you're with them in a non-exclusive agreement, which they used to be, I think now they're more exclusive, they'll take that title Another Rainy Day and they'll add the suffix JP at the end of it. So it'll be Another Rainy Day, JP. That distinguishes that they own part of that song now. They don't own the original full. You own that 100%. But they now have that in their catalog. If they pitch it to a show like Catfish or ESPN shows, once that song or track is used, it's registered on the cue sheet that's sent to your PRO as Another Rainy Day, JP. The reason that is because you didn't submit that song yourself. Say if you found a music supervisor for Fox Sports, and you submitted Another Rainy Day to them directly, you'd get 100% of the publishing and 100% of the writer's share. But the way it works with music libraries, and I've talked about this before, is that they are acting as your agent almost. You know, they're the ones that are pitching you music and that sort of thing. So most non-exclusive deals, some vary, but most non-exclusive deals are 50% and 50%. So for example, if Jingle Punks pitches that song to Fox Sports, they take 50%, which is the publisher's share. And you take the 50% as the writer's share. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to show you some examples of that. So if that same song, Another Rainy Day, is in Bed Tracks, another library, they will register it a different way. Bed Tracks typically changes the names completely. So if you register your song, which you do right away as soon as you finish it, you register that title in your PRO, then you ship that song to a library that you want to have pitch for you. They will take that title and they'll just add something to it that distinguishes it from theirs, to be theirs. So for example, and I'll be showing you here momentarily, there's many different libraries that have the same piece of music for me. Sometimes they pitch the same piece to the same show. It's happened. So what they do then is on the cue sheets from the music editor or whoever is doing those on the end of the production, they will add the track that they've used. Now there can be some confusion with that, and I'm going to show you a little trick that I use to avoid that. Excuse me, because with so many people having your music, and there's so many libraries out there, there can be confusion sometimes with your PRO, but I'm going to show you a little trick on how to avoid that. One note, you do not want to ever, I've never done this, if you're with an exclusive agreement library, which I've got a few, we'll talk about that further on down the road. As soon as you write your track, another rainy day there, and you have an exclusive arrangement with the library, do not register it on your end. They will do that themselves. So exclusives will register it themselves. So if I pitch a track, for example, today to one of my exclusive libraries, if they want it, they will register it. I will not, because it's a different arrangement, and we'll get into that later on. So again, just to recap on the royalties thing and any upfront payments again for your song. So say Jingle Punks pitched Another Rainy Day for a TV ad or a television show that had upfront money. So say the money was $10,000 for an ad. They also get 50% of that as well. So the splits are 50-50 typically. There are some libraries that will go 60-40 in the artist's favor. Soda Box Music is one of those. But once they register that track with a different name on it, that's what gives them the kind of distinguishing mark for that track. So if you've got 10 libraries with the same track, they're all going to have different names. I'm going to show you how that works. So remember, you get 50% as soon as you send that track and it gets used to a library, gets used in the show. Your royalty statement 9 months later, if it was played today, for example, would show 50% of the royalties go to you, and the number would be there, and the other 50% would go to that library. I hope that's clear. Sometimes it's hard for people to understand that, but I'm going to show you a little bit about how I do it and how they do it and what to look for on your statements with your PRO. Okay, so we're talking about retitling. I just want to give you a little example here. Right here where you're actually in my SOCAN account, for example. I just want to point a few things out. So let's talk about the track Infidel. I've talked a little bit about that in previous lessons. So it was written in 2014. I wrote it. I had a plan to submit it to as many libraries as I could, but I registered it myself. So that means I own 100% right here. So I own 50% of the publishing, 50% of the writer's share. So I own the whole thing. That's important because if you're in a non-exclusive agreement with other companies, and say you meet up with a music supervisor at a conference, or you contact them via LinkedIn or that sort of thing, if you pitch your music to them directly, you're going to get twice as much money, pretty much. That's how it works. I'm going to show you some examples of that, or an example of how that works. So if I take this song, Infidel, that I've written myself, I pitch it to Mr. Music Supervisor in LA, he puts it on a TV show or different episodes, I get 100% of the share. That's how that works. Now, in the way of retitling, you can see this, and I'm going to show you another page of this in a second. I've also put this in different places. So I put it in Audio Sparks, where people like indie filmmakers or people needing music for games and that sort of thing can use it. So as soon as I submit it to them, they automatically put a different title on it. So now it's called Infidel AA Library. That's just the library that it's in. So now when someone buys this track off their site or licenses this track, they get the publisher share. That's this 50% right here. So now I've got a different version of it here that I did. So I had a fade end on it for some reason. I'm not sure why I did that. But if you look down here, Jingle Punks has this track as well on a non-exclusive agreement. So now they've changed it to Infidel JP. Okay? So again, 50%. They get 50%. Now another library, this is a library in LA, they've got this track and have used it. So they've registered it as Infidel LVM. That's how they do it. And they've got another part to it because they broke this track up into two parts. So LVM, they registered both of those. So that's how music supervisors and editors will distinguish between who's submitting what music or what music gets used. So if I had submitted this Infidel track to the TV show Catfish, for example, directly, I'd get 100%. But obviously I don't have that many contacts in Catfish back then anyway. So I submitted to Jingle Punks, and they got a bunch of episodes, 20 episodes I think right now. So every time I get paid for that, Jingle Punks gets 50%. That's why I say they're your agents, or they're like your partners, or they're your publishers really, but they're the ones that are out there. Those are the guys that are out there pitching it. So if we go to the next page, You'll see there's more versions of this track, Infidel. There's part 2 track, Infidel part 2. So I registered everything that I did. So if I did 3 or 4 different versions of this, I'd register them all. Then I'd pitch them all to the actual music library. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to show you another example. This is a track called What Lies Ahead. Take a second to pull up here because there's a lot of tracks in here. So here we are, What Lies Ahead. So I wrote the song or the track, What Lies Ahead, and I had an ambient mix, so I registered it. 2013. Audio Sparks, which is, I call a music warehouse kind of library, which I'll get into in the coming weeks or lessons. They have it in their library. So again, they take it and they put their own title on it. What Lies Ahead, JP, Jingle Punks owns that, half of that. So if I still pitch this original version to a TV show or a film myself, again, I get the 100%. Whereas if these guys do it, they get the publisher's share 50%. And you see London Violet Music, LA has it as well. I've got different, there's like a European library here, so they've got FW. So many people do it different ways. So if I go to, every library will distinguish between each one with the prefix or a suffix, or sometimes a number too. Sometimes people change it completely. So if I go to here, this is a Canadian library that I work with, InStyle Music. They put the prefix in, ISMC. So you can see these tracks, there's different versions of this track. They put it at the beginning. So I own the original version of this. Here it is right here, Isolation, which has been in a bunch of TV shows. But they also have a couple of versions of it as well. So they mark it with ISMC. I hope that makes sense to everybody. So if you're looking at your statements, it's good to track that. The thing I want to talk about next is going to be a little trick that I use to avoid a problem. So we'll get onto that right now. Okay, here we are again. Now, you think about the confusion that can happen with, sending the same song or songs to or tracks to different libraries. It's very true. And it happened to me, and I'm going to give you a little tip on how not to have it happen to you. So I have this track called Infidel. I have a music supervisor that I've worked with. I actually got my first placement from him. I think I mentioned this in one of our other lessons. Ricky Schroeder, the child actor, was doing a 6-part documentary, on the Afghanistan War called The Fighting Season. You can see it right here. So right here, I submitted 50 tracks to this man, and he used 6, I think 5 or 6. But those tracks were in other places as well. So like Infidel, I was in Jingle Punks and in other libraries. Isolation was in other libraries. So I get my royalty check, and really what happened was I had sent the track to these tracks to this man, but they all still had the same kind of title. So if I sent the track directly, I should get 100% of all monies attached to that, since Jingle Punks didn't pitch it, or InStyle Music didn't pitch it, and that sort of thing. So when I get my royalty statement, and you can see there's pretty substantial amounts, they were cut by 50% because the music supervisor or music editor put the wrong name in, or someone at SOCAN just saw Infidel and just did a search. So my tip for you is to do this. If you have a track called Infidel, for example, and you register it, you write it, and you want to submit it to other libraries, change the title. I talked a little bit about this in the lesson. So if it's Infidel, maybe it's, I don't know, Bad Guy or Roughneck, or change it every time. So what I do now is every time I write a track and I call it something and I register it for a non-exclusive library, I just register it with my name, obviously, and then send it out. Every time I send it to a different library, I change the title and then re-register that title at SOCAN. So, for example, I had Infidel. If I want to take that track today and say I find a brand new library that wants to listen to my music, I will take that title of that track, Infidel, I'll change it or add a new title, And what I'll do then is send it off, but I'll register that new title. So for example, if I wrote a song called Another Sunny Day, it was mine, it's in a certain library, I find a new library, I want to put another sunny day in that library, I'll change it to maybe Day at the Beach, and I'll register that title with SOCAN, and then I can distinguish and not have any problems when it comes to losing royalties, because you do get your royalties back, obviously, but what happened was that SOCAN had to go and do some digging, find out the problem, and then pay me the 50% back of these amounts. So you can see $852, it's another $852 I made. Here's another one, $243. Here's another one, $518. It was basically almost $5,000 worth of income that was just messed up on the SOCAN front. So here's my thought process. You write a song, you register the title. You go to send it to a library, that's great. You go to send it to a second library, change the title and re-register it. You want to go to a third library, change the title again. It could be just small little changes that are just similar. It's really an art to get titling figured out because you want supervisors to see a title and go, oh, that song might fit this kind of scene without even listening to it. But you'll actually better the chances of having your song listened to if it's got a good title. So change your titles up. There's a spreadsheet there to keep track of it, and you'll avoid any pains later on collecting royalties. I hope that makes sense. Okay, I hope that was informative for you and made sense. If not, send me a note. I can maybe explain it a little bit differently or fix any problems that you may have. So we talked about retitling. So every time you send your track, the same track to different libraries, they're going to put a different title on it. Sometimes a number, sometimes just a little prefix or suffix. Sometimes they change the name completely. So that's just part of it. That's just what gives them the ownership of that track, and all that stuff comes on the cue sheets and that sort of thing. So if Jingle Punks, like I said earlier, pitch the track to a TV show, the music editor knows right away because that title will come up. I suggest retitling, like a little trick I just showed you. Every time you send your music, the same track to different music libraries, I change the title just because of the confusion that I went through there a few years ago, which I just showed you there. That just makes it easy to track where your music's at, makes it easy to make sure nobody gets paid the wrong amount of money and that sort of thing. And it does happen because it's still a manual business. It's not something that's picked up and all of a sudden drops into a computer and that sort of thing. It's still people physically put this stuff in there. So there's a spreadsheet there that I've got for you, and basically what it is to every time you submit your track to a different library, if you change the title, which you should, and then you register that title too. So if you take Another Rainy Day, the original title, and you submit it to Jingle Punks, and then you decide you're going to submit the same track to Bed Tracks or another library, Jingle Punks plus others, change the title, change the name. So maybe it's Another Rainy Day for Jingle Punks, and maybe it's A Little Darker Day or something like that for Bed Tracks. It just makes it easier to track everything. There's some samples there, and there's also just a one-pager to show you, or some examples in the overview of how they change these names around a little bit. So what to look for in your PRO statements and how that works. So download the samples, download the activities, utilize these business materials. They're really important. You really have to keep track of your business, which means keep track of your music, where it's going. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. So stay creative, and I'll talk to you again next time.